Projects must embrace systems-based completions in order to have a structured approach to completing commissioning. The problem is, a lot of projects don't do this or try to implement this too late in the project lifecycle. Listen to this episode to understand a systems-based approach to projects and how you can set your projects up for success.
You're listening to the Industrial Commissioning Association podcast, where we discuss best practices for industrial plant process and energy system commissioning. Get ready to say no to outdated industry norms and say yes to improved project performance. Here's your host, Paul Turner.
Welcome to this week's episode. One of the largest problems or challenges in the industry is that lots of groups are unfortunately working in silos. Design, construction, and commissioning are doing their best work, but they're not necessarily integrated, coordinated, and working together. The only way to do that is to have a systems-based approach when you're planning for projects. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is a systems-based approach and how to start with the end in mind to ensure a smooth transition from construction to commissioning. Now, if you haven't already, become a member of the Industrial Commissioning Association. You can get access to the Global Commissioning Standard. You can get access to several other resources that show you everything we're going to talk about today and how to structure your projects for success. And you can do that at icxa.net/join. And as I go through this presentation, if you have any questions or comments, please shoot them in the chat and we'll be sure to get them answered at the end of the discussion here. I'll go through each of your questions and make sure you've got the commissioning information you need. So it's no secret that the construction industry is broken. It's a failed industry. It's been like this for several decades, and the data shows us that 9 out of 10 projects are late and over budget. The problem is, projects are often focused on the individual tasks, like I mentioned, very siloed, instead of focusing on the intended outcome, which is successful commissioning and startup, so that we can deliver high quality systems that can be used for decades of reliable operation. So when you think of major tasks on a project, construction is one of those tasks, right? It's a big one, but it's not the end outcome. The end outcome, of course, is successful commissioning. And that needs to be the focus of projects right from the beginning, is to focus on outcomes rather than focus on tasks. And I believe that commissioning is the key to project success. By focusing on commissioning, we can deliver successful projects. We can focus on the intended outcome. We can focus on the reason for the investment to build the project in the first place, which is successful commissioning. Now, we're the only ones that can fix the broken construction industry. It's not going to come from other groups because they've tried and failed for decades, right? Commissioning folks are the only ones that can deliver on project outcomes, and we're the only ones that are going to be able to fix the broken construction industry. Commissioning, of course, isn't just about testing. It's about leading. Commissioning is the strategy to make projects successful. And everyone on this call, you are the commissioning leaders that the industry needs and has been waiting for to be able to deliver successful projects. Commissioning is the overall grand master, the conductor that is orchestrating all of the pieces of the project and making sure that everyone's focused on the intended outcome. And only when you have that overall conductor is project going to be successful. Imagine if you had a symphony and each group, the strings, the wind instruments, whatever, they're all playing individually on their own. It's going to sound terrible, right? You need the overall conductor to make sure that everything is planned and appropriate and coming together successfully in the end. The way to do that is by embracing a systems-based approach. And this is missing on a lot of projects. If you're working with other groups that want to work collaboratively and plan an integrated approach, then we can plan for a systems-based approach and success. But groups that want to work isolated and do their own thing and get in and get out and not have interference with other groups on the project or even discuss, then that's not going to work. It's not a systems-based approach. And commissioning is the missing leadership function at the beginning of projects that sets projects up with a systems-based approach. My goal with the Industrial Commissioning Association is to create a new approach to projects with the ICA Global Commissioning Standard. And we've done this. We've released the ICA Global Commissioning Standard. It's available to everyone. You can download a copy and start applying it to your projects right away. And I encourage you to do that. Another goal is to raise up a new generation of commissioning leaders that can lead projects to success. We need industry leaders, especially from a commissioning perspective, to embrace a systems-based approach and be able to lead projects to success. And without that, we're going to have a lot of trouble delivering on our projects and our expected outcomes without commissioning leaders to be able to guide projects to success. And my primary goal is to turn projects into success stories. We don't want more case studies of failed projects. We want to deliver on success. We've got a lot of global ambitions underway that we're undertaking here for climate initiatives, for decarbonization, for electrification. There's trillions of dollars to be invested on projects, and we must be delivering the world that we want successfully with successful projects rather than the industry standard of 9 out of 10 projects being late and over budget. So why do we need a systems-based approach? Well, projects are very complex. There's lots of moving pieces. There's lots of people involved. There's lots of individual pieces of equipment, and they're becoming more complex. Everything is integrated and interconnected. PLC, digital logic controls, remote operations. Projects are getting more complex, and we need a structured systems-based approach to be able to pull all of these items together so that they work in the end. Like I mentioned before, with siloed disciplines and everybody's working individually on their own component, then there's missed interfaces, lots of delays, of course, because project handovers aren't planned or integrated correctly, lots of risk on projects. And we see this all the time when projects are progressing or may seem to be progressing successfully, but then as soon as you get to the integration aspects of a project during commissioning, everything falls apart and everything's quite delayed, right? Because there was no upfront planning with a systems-based approach. With systems-based thinking, we can have a structured approach to projects. So a huge project and lots of moving pieces, it would seem very complex, but with a systems-based approach, we can break it down and very logically complete projects in chunks as systems are started up and integrated into the overall system. And this is the only way to plan this in advance to have projects be successful. The problem is a lot of projects aren't thinking this way at the beginning and aren't planning for a systems-based approach, and it's not integrated into contracts and doesn't come together in the end successfully. So what is a systems-based approach? The mindset really needs to be thinking in terms of complete systems, not just installed components. So construction very naturally will think about installation by discipline, right? Installing electrical trades, installing mechanical trades, installing the control and protection. But individually, those discipline aspects don't form a system and they're not all that useful on their own. That's great if the pump is installed, but we need several other components with that to form a system. Say if we're developing a chemical dosing system, it would be comprised of pipes, pumps, motors, digital logic controls, dosing elements. All of those group of equipment will form a system, right? And that's the approach that we need to take, is not completion by discipline, not completion by, say, area-based, but completion by system. This doesn't necessarily align with your project WBS, and this doesn't align with what construction folks might undertake for AWP or advanced work planning. Those are great for design or great for construction, but we need to transform that, and a systems-based approach is the only way to finish projects in a logical order. So we can certainly align the WBS and align the AWP with what we need for a systems-based approach, but we need to make that transition so that we're focused on systems and not just individual disciplines or engineering work packages. This is not agile or sprint. It has nothing to do with the trendy project management aspects. This is a systems-based approach, strictly grouping aspects of the project by system for logical completion, and then completing these in a series of functional systems. If you've got 1 or 2 or 200 different systems on your project, whatever that is taking those through each of our commissioning workflows for completion as we go through our gated commissioning workflows for each system. And you'll have several systems at various stages of completion as they're going through the workflows. Now, this is complex and it needs to be planned for well in advance. It doesn't just happen on projects. It does require some upfront planning to make sure that we have a systems-based approach. There's a critical phase in the commissioning phases and handover model called construction completions. And this is the point in the project where roughly about 60 or 70% complete construction, this is where the transition needs to take place to transition from area-based construction to systems-based completions. And this is the part that's largely missing on a lot of projects, and this never happens. Construction folks just want to focus on their work, and they're not necessarily interested in others dictating their workflows or telling them how to complete things, especially when commissioning folks arrive on projects later and want to try and implement some of these changes. That never goes well. It needs to be planned for in advance to plan for this transition from area-based construction to systems-based completion. And many projects are missing this, and this is where projects fall apart, is because there was no systems-based approach planned for early in projects, in contracts, planned up front in contracts so that everybody knows how to complete their work to align with commissioning and startup sequences. So this is a figure right from the ICA Global Commissioning Standard, and this defines how this transition takes place, where during construction, activities would be in the build phase, installing by area. And that's, of course, what we want construction folks to do. We want them to optimize their installation sequences and optimize long lead delivery for equipment, large workforces, and optimize installations by area. But then that transition needs to take place as they're getting closer to completion and transition to a systems-based completion approach, so that we can complete portions of the project by system. This systems-based approach is so critical to projects and doesn't always happen on projects, and this is where projects run into problems. So through this transition, it's critical aspect to align construction completions with the systems that are required and the sequence that's required for commissioning and startup. The key principle, of course, is systems-based thinking. And if we're thinking about this as a mindset, it's pretty hard to have a mindset transferred from one group to the other. The best way to define that is in contracts, to define it up front so that everybody knows what's expected and what success looks like during commissioning. We need to be taking that holistic approach to projects and looking at the full project lifecycle right up front at the beginning, and not just construction. We need to focus on all aspects of the project. It's the only way that projects are successful is when each individual phase is successful on its own, right? So it's great if we've gotten through construction, but we need to also have commissioning integrated into construction completion plans to be able to have that systems-based thinking approach and align projects for success at the end. All projects are getting even more and more integrated, like I mentioned before, and this needs to be coordinated early and enforced in contracts so that everyone has a clear understanding of what success looks like during commissioning. There's lots of interfaces, even more and more interfaces on projects, and these need to be identified and managed so that everything interconnects and comes together during commissioning. And this is what this looks like. This is a figure right out of the ICA Global Commissioning Standard as well. We'll have a series of construction completion milestones where each system that we've defined is completed and then can move into the next phases of on-site testing for static commissioning and dynamic commissioning. And we'll have a series of each of our construction completion dates defined and agreed to in contracts so that groups know what needs to be completed and in what order they need to be completed to align with commissioning and startup. So definitely download the ICA Global Commissioning Standard. You can get these figures, you can get more definition and detail of this handover process and apply that to your projects right away. Like I mentioned earlier, we need to transition from discipline-based thinking to a systems-based thinking. We can't have groups delivering in silos because that has never worked for the last several decades. It's caused lots of problems. If it's only an electrical installation and a mechanical installation, we can't be just delivering by trade. We need to think, what does each system actually need to be able to function reliably? It's going to, of course, need the electrical aspects. It's going to need the mechanical aspects. It's going to need the digital control systems. All of those, that group of items will form a functional system, and they all need to be available to proceed during commissioning by system. Now, this is another figure from the ICA Global Commissioning Standard, and you can certainly define a discipline construction completion in your commissioning workflows. And the standard does show that. This is the DCC milestone that you see on the screen there. Discipline construction completion can certainly align to have the electrical discipline complete and the mechanical discipline complete. This is an option, and you can structure your commissioning workflows in this manner if this best aligns with your projects. That does allow some initial advanced static commissioning to take place by discipline. You can start testing some of the electrical systems, but the ultimate milestone we need to get to is that one right next to it, CC, construction completion, where all of the disciplines are completed and we have a full functional system that we can use. You can define this on your projects. If a discipline construction completion milestone makes sense, you can define that as long as it's defined and known by all groups in what those handover milestones are. So there's some tools that we can use to enable a systems-based completion approach on projects. The first one and the most principal one is contracts. When we look at a lot of contracts on projects, they're pretty light on commissioning details. There's not a lot of information in there. You might find some information on the technical aspects of commissioning and the requirements to be met, but there's very little details in there on the project management approach to commissioning or the commercial aspects of commissioning. And when that's not defined in there, then of course, construction groups are going to focus on their own aspects of construction and installation, but without that definition in contracts, then they have no definition of what their completions look like and what needs to align with commissioning. These sequences of completions, these need to be defined in contracts, not just by large system and say a 230 kV AC switchyard, broken down by bays to know that bay 2 is required first, bay 4 is required second. What is the energization sequence and what are the systems that are going to be required in that sequence to align with your energization and commissioning and startup sequences? So it's a challenge to have construction groups align with this, but the fundamental problem is that if construction groups don't have experience working with a systems-based completion approach, then I would challenge to say that they're not contractors that are qualified to be able to work on projects. If they're only going to focus on construction and have complete disregard for a systems-based completions process, then if they've never done this in the past and they have no intention of doing it, then they're not qualified to do the work. We need to be selecting and awarding contracts to groups that have a full and complete understanding of a systems-based completion approach and can align with what's required with commissioning. It's the only way that projects are successful is when all groups are working collaboratively together. Another tool that's fundamental to systems-based completion approach is CMS software. If you're stuck using spreadsheets, it's pretty tough to manage completions using just Excel or a to-do list. We need to be using CMS software because that defines all of the project systematization and manages each of our construction completion packages through each of our managed gated commissioning workflows. This tracks everything, nothing gets missed. Everyone has a clear visibility of what's required and when it's required and how their project role contributes to commissioning success. It's a challenge for sure, but it's essentially a culture shift in the construction industry, right? The approach to have construction-led projects has not worked. It hasn't worked for several decades, and it's not going to work if you're only focusing on the task of construction and not focusing on the outcome of commissioning. Then projects are never going to be successful. And we need to have a commissioning first approach planned with a systems-based completion approach right at the beginning of projects. That's the only way to set projects up and structure them for success. And that requires commissioning leadership. That's everyone on this call to be the commissioning leaders to shape projects in this correct fashion for a systems-based approach to completion. We need to be focusing on systems-based thinking, and that only starts with leadership, right? And that can only come from the commissioning folks. The other groups in broken projects, well, then we're never going to deliver on the world that we want to deliver here. We need to focus on the expectations and the outcomes on projects because we're not meeting expectations. The outcomes on projects are still far, far away from expectations, with projects being late and over budget. Projects are pointing fingers and everybody's doing the blame game. That's not how we're going to deliver successful infrastructure in the world. Commissioning folks are the only ones that can see the big picture and plan for project success. We can't individually, as myself or yourself or anybody, just continue to be frustrated on projects and think and know that there's a better way. We must speak up as a commissioning community and lead impactful change if we're going to help the construction industry become more successful. It's a huge challenge for sure, but definitely a worthy undertaking to help the construction industry understand the importance of commissioning and how we're going to deliver successful projects. Projects are counting on the commissioning folks, even if they don't realize it, they're counting on the commissioning folks to be able to lead projects to success. We can't continue to have cowboy commissioning at the end of projects where it's just a mad scramble and try and make everything work in the end. We need a systems-based approach on projects, all projects, if they're going to be successful. We need to become the commissioning leaders the construction industry has really been waiting for, the group of individuals that can change projects and change outcomes and essentially hand over a better world and do much better on projects than we have in the last several decades. So I've got some resources to help you with this challenge and mission that we've got here to help others on projects understand the importance of commissioning. Our newly released commissioning course lineup is the best that's out there and shows you exactly how to set your projects up for success. There's industry-specific modules, there's individual course pieces. You can check that out and get this information applied to your projects. You can check that out at icxa.net/courses and apply this on your projects right away to plan for a systems-based approach. If you haven't already gotten the ICA Global Commissioning Standard, definitely check that out at icxa.net/join. You can get a copy of all 9 documents of the standard. As well, this brochure, single sheet here is good as a conversation starter to help other people understand the importance of commissioning as well. Go to icxa.net/brochure and you can download a copy of that and use that for some of your discussions on commissioning. So let's answer any questions that you have in the chat. I'll go back up to the top and go through some of your questions. And if there's anything else you'd like to ask, shoot them in the chat and I'll be able to get all of your questions answered. Hey, Peter, good to see you. So next week's presentation, Peter and I are going to discuss the role of the project commissioner. So you'll definitely want to catch next week's episode as well, where Peter and I will discuss the importance of how the role of the project commissioner really sets up project success right from the beginning with this systems-based approach. And we'll have that discussion next week this time, so definitely check that out. All right. So I do want to stress the importance of this. You hear from a lot of people on projects saying that commissioning folks need to be involved early in projects. This is the principal and primary reason, is so that projects can be set up with a systems-based approach and plan for project success right at the beginning. Commissioning isn't just testing at the end, right? Everything we've talked about here does require upfront planning to make that transition from area-based construction to systems-based completion. And this is the principal reason that commissioning folks need to be involved early in projects, is to plan this out, plan this in contracts, plan this out with other groups on projects, and take a holistic approach to project success rather than the siloed approach that we've been taking on projects for years. I do appreciate everyone joining this week's episode, and definitely check out next week's episode where Peter and I will have a chat and discuss the role of the project commissioner. I'll send that link out very soon and you can check that out, and I hope to see you there. All right. Thanks everyone for joining and have a great day.
Thanks for listening. To become a member of the Industrial Commissioning Association, visit icxa.net. Members get access to commissioning standards, procurement specifications, commissioning training and certification, plus many more specialized resources to help you with commissioning of your industrial plant process and energy systems. Visit icxa.net for more information.